the more militarily oriented of the anti-Castro Cubans, the people who felt betrayed by President Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs, the mob, who wanted the gaming rights back in Havana. They were losing millions of dollars every day since Castro closed the casinos. The ultra-right wing, who hated President Kennedy for virtually everything he stood for. And the ultra-right wing hawks within the CIA, the ones who had been fired, or people related to those politically, who had been fired by President Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs. They all had a common goal. They wanted the president out of the way. They wanted Cuba clear of Castro and the communist threat in the Western Hemisphere. They had the most to gain. They had the motive, the opportunity, and the means to kill President Kennedy. If that is the cake, then the icing on the cake is the president's decision to withdraw the troops from Vietnam. That was the CIA's war. They wanted it, they wanted to promote it, they wanted to push it.
The people who I think had most to gain, as they saw it, were the military-industrial intelligence complex. It's a myth that the intelligence agents don't make policy. They make it all the time. They always say they're carrying out policy, and sometimes they are. The people who had most to gain were those who didn't want the peace in the world that John Kennedy had tried to turn the world toward when he and Khrushchev worked out the solution to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The people who didn't want John Kennedy to be president were those who were making incredible fortunes from war production.
Had Kennedy lived, I think we'd have had no Vietnam War, with all of its traumatic and divisive influences in America. I think we would have escaped that. I think the world would have escaped. The 50,000 odd Americans dead and 300,000 more wounded and over 500,000 more hooked on dangerous drugs and tropical diseases. The divisiveness of that war that so many of the people thought unjustified and unnecessary and it shouldn't have been there. It split this country widely, and many of those things have lingered on since.
Kennedy made a speech at American University in June of the year before he died, and he said, we live in one world, we got to breathe in the same air, and we got to live together, we're going to die together. He was very disturbed by our involvement in Vietnam, which he inherited. And there came a time when he called his generals in and spoke to them, and after he spoke to them, the Pentagon issued a small statement saying that we have re-evaluated our involvement in Vietnam and find that we can begin to withdraw our men. The plan was to begin by withdrawing 1,000 a month. 17,000 were to be withdrawn by the time of the election, which was a year later. One plane load reached the United States when John Kennedy was killed. 3 days after the assassination, the body wasn't yet in the ground. The Pentagon issued what it called a re-evaluation of its re-evaluation. And they said simply that we found that our re-evaluation was optimistic. And the rest is history. The whole world turned around on it. The world